Hi everyone, this is Piyush Ranjan from Management Masters. I'm the founder of Management Masters. We are a boutique MBA admissions consulting firm. We focus very heavily and exclusively on the top MBA programs around the world. And thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you here. We wanted to have this session because the 2027 intake MBA applications are coming up soon, and this is the perfect time when candidates can get started on strengthening up their profiles, working on any shortcomings within their profiles, and essentially get started on application building. So I have with me Aniket. He is my colleague, and he is based out of Japan. And essentially, we did capture a lot of questions. I think we had almost 120 people sending us their questions. So we have compiled a list of those questions. These are some of the biggest confusions and doubts that candidates have basically come up with. And we would try to answer as many questions as possible for them. Before we sort of jump into that, very quickly, a brief introduction about me. So, as I said, my name is Piyush. I graduated from IIT BHU in 2012, and thereafter I went for my MIM at University of St. Gallen. It is the number one MIM program for I think 13, 14 years now. And after that, I worked for almost 4.5 years in Europe. And in 2019, I came back to India to start Management Masters. And over the last 7 years at Management Masters, we have had more than 170 people getting admits to top MBA programs. Our candidates have won more than $3 million in scholarships. 100% of our women candidates have received admits from their dream schools. And at the same time, we have been very, very fortunate to have these candidates trust us. I also have Aniket with me. So Aniket, would be lovely to have an introduction from you, and then we can get started on the questions from everyone. And if you're watching this live and you have any questions, please absolutely feel free to share your questions in the chat box. I believe you'll need to subscribe and to be able to share your questions, but feel free to share your questions. We'll be happy to take them up once we are sort of gone through the list of questions that we already have. Aniket, would be great
Yeah,
to have an introduction.
absolutely. No, thank you so much, Piyush. And thank you everyone for joining this session. I am Aniket. Also graduated from IIT same as Piyush. So the fun fact is we've known each other for what, more than 15 years at this point in time. Graduated in 2014. I immediately switched into the management consulting. So I worked as management consultant primarily in India and US for about 7.5 years. After that, I did my MBA from HEC. Basically, that's my alma mater. So I graduated in June 2023. After that, worked as a consultant again, and now I'm full time with Management Masters, working with Piyush, with you. And yeah, I'm super excited to support more candidates following a similar journey or who want to do a same path for different reasons, of course, and see how it spans out.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Aniket. Uh, a very common question I think we received from candidates, I think we have almost 56 people or 52 people who asked this question. And this is essentially about school selection, right? So given the current scenario, the macroeconomic scenario, the geopolitical scenario, as well as, in general, the questions that people have, what would you suggest would be a good way or a good process for candidates to essentially uh, select the schools that they would want to go to or they would want to apply to?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's a really important question. I'm super happy that it came first because it's not sufficient that you just, take the Financial Times ranking and select, let's say, top 20, 25 schools. I don't think it works like that. I remember during one of my initial days conversation, someone mentioned something very interesting that a school selection for MBA is just like a marriage candidate selection. So you really, really have to look into what are the different things that the school is offering and whether it fits your need, right? So it's not a simple yes or no answer. In that case, you should see whether what your goals are after MBA, whether this is something supported by school, what are the geographies that you want to do. So, a basic idea for selecting a school would be to first understand your own priorities, to first understand why is it that you want an MBA? Is it really something that you need in order to, let's say, boost your career or any other personal or professional goals that you may have in the mind? Once that is decided, or let's say once you have a bit of a clarity on that, I would say then understand what schools offer. Go through them, go through all of them, go through the webinars, the online available information, talk to people, as many of them as you can, and really try to ask this that will I be successful in this school? Does this school really help me to achieve what I think I want to do? And of course, nothing is set in stone, right? After an MBA, plans may change in the future. Having said that, at least you need to have a certain level of understanding how that this is a mutually beneficial arrangement. And it's only after that is when I would say that whether you should go for a school selection. Right? Once you have a short list of, let's say, 5, 10, whatever number of schools that you think it's good for you, then I think it's entirely on individual candidate dependent on how they want to do it. But I think at least to reach this step, it already takes a significant effort.
Right. So if I understand you correctly, what you mean to say, the first step is for the candidates to figure out what they want
Yeah,
and then try to find schools which will give them what they want. Would that be correct?
exactly. Exactly. Because
Right.
just going for school without knowing what I want, I don't know how I can say whether this is a good school for me versus whether it's not a good school for me.
Right. So I would have two follow-up questions there. One would be candidate specific. Another one would be more school specific, right? So let's say I know what I want out of an MBA, but what would you say would be the best ways for me to figure out, whether a school particularly provides those things or not? How would how would you suggest candidates to actually try to figure that out?
Now, that's a good question, right? So let's say, assuming this current hypothesis that you know what you want after MBA or what you want from an MBA, right? Having established that, if you want to find out schools, a lot of information right now is already available online. All the schools do their own promotion marketing. So understanding, like following their social media accounts, seeing what are the new updates, new changes that they are pushing, their own website, then also all of these webinars, seminars that they conduct across the world, attend those. I think those would provide a really good platform to ask live questions to either alumni or adcoms or whoever is present out there. And then after that, also an equally important step is to try and reach out to any of the school alumni or current students because they would be the ones who have really experienced the school themselves so that they can answer the question in a much more grounded manner. The questions that you would ask will have a lot more value add for yourself, right? So, like, this is how I would try to first try to search about the school. And then, since as you establish, you already know what you want, the question should accordingly focus to identify whether those things will be supported by a school or not. And I think that's how I would go about finding whether a particular school really helps me achieve my goals or not.
Right. Thank you so much for that. Now, let's assume, okay, I know what I want. I also know that the B school offers what I want. What would be the next step in selecting which B schools to apply to? Because a lot of schools will be able, so let's say if I want to do consulting, almost all the top 15 B schools in the world, they are all great at consulting. Almost everyone has more than 35% placements in consulting. They have great ties with MBBs and all the other consulting firms in the world. So what should be the next step for me to be able to figure out, okay, that this is the school that I should be applying to or should not be applying to?
And that's a good question, right? After that, it depends on whether that school, let's say, what are your chances of getting into that school, right? And then how do you want to craft your own strategy? Uh, Everyone would want to go for the best schools out there, but accordingly, would the schools also want the best students out there? So, depending on your own profile, what things that you bring to the table, the gaps that you
Right.
have, whatever you would have identified for yourself. Accordingly, I think a good strategy could be either mixing with some dreams, some safe, some target schools that in mind. Some people also go for high risk strategy, although not my first choice in my opinion. But I mean, it's a subjective decision at the end of the day, right? But what I would recommend is, depending on your own profile strengths and gaps, would be to identify which are the dream schools for you, target schools for you, safe schools for you,
So
and then
this
have
is
a
where the
combination.
so is this where the profile's competitiveness will come into play?
Exactly. I would say this is exactly where the competitiveness of a profile gets defined.
Okay, understood. And let's say again we have a very competitive profile. We have a candidate who is, had a graduated from an IIT, had an excellent career track. They have a great GMAT score. They have excellent grades. They have a lot of extracurriculars. So again, a very, very strong candidate for a lot of schools. And then they want to do M7 schools, they want to do US top 10 schools. So again, that would give them a list of 10 to 15 schools, right?
Yeah,
So how would you narrow down how to select those 5 or 6 applications that you would want to do rather than
yeah.
doing all of these 15?
Well, that's a good question, right? So let's say if you really have first, like if let's say you really have a list of 10 to 15 schools that you can probably apply to, a good way that I at least do, or at least I tell people whom I work with, is to see whether you're overlapping certain schools together would be one. Like, which schools really make sense in terms of, if you're applying to all M7 schools, do you really get any different benefits out of them, or is it something like very specific that you get out of the same schools? So that could be one. The second could be, in order to, let's say, identify, do you really want an MBA, and accordingly try to have couple of safe schools, couple of dream schools, and then make a combination out of those. So that could be another way to go about it. Third, you can also apply through different rounds of applications if you really want to cover all the schools, right? And then honestly, depending on the profile, how good it is, at least ideal case that you're describing, let's say everything is there, right? So like good academics, good scores, everything is there. And then I think depending on the overall goals after MBA, whether they are more supported by, let's say, a particular geography better than the other geography, that could be another way to look into that, whether this school should be prioritized than the others.
Right. So I think what you're trying to say is that it gets much more nuanced rather than being very, very a very standard sort of process of selecting schools after a certain grade. Understood. Uh, Very quick sort of announcement here. Absolutely, if you have any follow-up questions that you would want to sort of clarify, please feel free to sort of put them in the chat, and we'll be happy to sort of answer those. Let's move to the second question that I have, and this again has been asked by almost 35 people uh, with respect to GMAT GRE scores, right? And so the question essentially is, what GMAT GRE scoring should I be focusing on if I'm looking at what top schools? And when is a retake worth it versus starting to focus on the applications instead of the test prep?
Okay. Okay. So let's take these two questions separately, right? So let me first take the what GMAT GRE scores should someone focus on, right? Um, that's defined, in my opinion, entirely by what kind of schools that you want to apply to. How a GMAT GRE score would work in an MBA application, I think it's slightly different from what we understand about tests in India. It's not a rank that you get after a GRE GMAT. It's more of a threshold that you need to clear to be able to prove your competitiveness to the school.
Mhm.
And then a good thumb rule in my case would be that look at what school you're applying, what's the average scores that they have already posted in their own websites and everywhere else, and then try to have something higher than that, because that's a very good way to prove that you're already bringing an above average score to that particular school when you're applying an application.
Mhm.
Of course, it's not as simple or as straightforward as that. There are some minor nuances and everything around it. But to answer your question, like this is how I would identify what score should I have for a particular school for a GMAT or a GRE.
And would this differ from school to school? Would this differ from region to region? For instance, US schools tend to have a lot more focus on the GMAT and the academic prep. So would they require higher scores versus European schools, or would all of the schools require like very high scores?
I would say like there are some minor region differences, that there are some nuances, as you rightly pointed out, that US schools tend to focus a lot more strongly on the academic part, which makes the score requirement slightly stronger than the European schools. But having said that, the goal for a candidate is also to prove their own competitiveness. In that case, of course, having a higher score will definitely help them. Doesn't mean that if they don't have a high score, there is no chance of them of getting in. There are those nuances that they can play around to be able to successfully apply and get admitted to the schools.
Right. We have a question from the chat, so I'll also take that up.
Yeah,
Before you get into GMAT and GRE and what scores are good, right? And it's a very basic question, a very important one. How do you select which exam to give? Should you take the GMAT or should you take the GRE? Like, how exactly should you figure out which one to take?
I was really hoping someone would ask this question, right? So, um, I would say this is one of the biggest myth coming from probably like 15, 20 years ago, that for business school it's GMAT, but for masters it's GRE. Funnily
And
enough,
not even a myth. It was true at that time.
and it was true at the time. That's true. Like,
Right.
it's not a myth. You're right. I misspoke, right? Like, it was true at the time, 20 years
Yeah.
ago. And I think that mentality has just carried forward to
Yeah.
now. But what in the recent year GRE has done significantly well is that it has put itself in the same level as GMAT. So right now, the schools don't really care which score you're taking, be it GRE, be it GMAT, as long as you have a good competitive score, they're happy to take you in on that score. There is absolutely no difference. There is no preference. There is no bias between GRE or GMAT. Now, considering that there is no requirements from school whether you should take one or the other, my suggestion, take what you feel more comfortable with. Both tests have a very different logistics attached to it, a different way that they conduct the test. So play with your strengths so that you can get a good score and then apply to a good school. As simple as that.
Perfect. That I hope that answers the question. Uh, And yeah, let's come back to the second part of the initial question, right? So,
Yeah.
what is the time when one should start focusing on the other parts of the application rather than uh, focusing on still retaking the test?
True. So there are, I would say, like multiple scenarios to it, but let me take one or two, which are the most common scenarios that I have seen while working with different candidates, right? So when you should retake the test, if you are average or below average for the school's GMAT score, I would say it absolutely makes sense. And this I'm talking about more for the people who are from this overrepresented pool, because there it's even more a need to prove your competitiveness rather than just, let's say, it's good to have, it's more required to have that. So then even a 10 to 20 point difference would give a good advantage, because if that can push you over the average, right? So that's probably a very common use case or very common place that I've seen people try to retake, and it has really helped them convert a certain school. Where it might not make a lot of sense is, again, I'm making it up. Let's say GMAT standard, right? The school average is somewhere around 720. As a candidate, you already have a 740 score, which is nicely 20 points higher than the school's average. There, in my opinion, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to retake the test, because even if you retake the test and if you score, let's say 750, 760, yes, it's an amazing score. Don't get me wrong. I think it's an amazing score, but it's a threshold. It's not a rank. You have already cleared a threshold. So
Hmm.
then I think it makes a lot more sense to improve other aspects of your profile, because an MBA admission works more holistical. So there, I would say it doesn't really make sense to retake the score. So in summary,
Hmm.
retake to be able to prove your competitiveness. Once you have done that, I think it's good.
Right. I think just to add here, what we have done with a lot of candidates that have worked with us as well is, once you've reached a score that feels competitive, that helps you build a competitive application. Once you've reached that score, it may not be higher than the average score, but once you have that competitiveness and your overall profile is not lacking anywhere, and you are able to sort of build something, a good story, a good application. Even then, we have been able to sort of work with the candidates while they are still working on retaking the test, and then go
Yeah.
on ahead with the applications, right? So just for an example, I believe we were working with a candidate in round one this year, who had a 700 in GMAT, right? And what she did was, so 700 in GMAT, very good academic background, and her goals also aligned very nicely with European schools, what she wanted to do. And her career, her extracurriculars, everything aligned very well with what European schools would want. So what she
Yeah.
wanted to target was essentially top European business schools. And for that, the 700, is it the most competitive score? No. Obviously, she could have had a better score. Uh, but at the same time, the 700 would not have been a deal breaker,
Yeah.
right? So 700 is a perfectly good score for INSEAD or LBS or ESA
Yeah.
or HEC Paris, one of the best schools in Europe. So
Yeah.
what we decided to do was, we started working on the applications, and while she was working on the applications, she also said, okay, I'm probably going to try give her one more shot to the beast,
Yeah.
the test, or you know, a few other candidates in a similar position would say, okay, I know this is the best that I have done. I've given it all to my test, but I cannot go beyond 700, and I would want to
Yeah.
take a shot, right?
Yeah.
And when you do that, you're simply being aware, okay, this is a drawback area. So you have to have a very good mix up of the kind of schools that you would want to apply. Don't end
Yeah.
up only applying to INSEAD and LBS because they're the most competitive ones, but also
Yeah.
apply to more achievable schools. So I think you absolutely perfectly
I
mentioned,
agree.
after a certain limit, after a certain threshold, a higher score stops adding value because
Yeah.
you've already met the criteria. And then it becomes more about, okay,
Yeah.
what you're presenting, how you're presenting, right?
Maybe if I can add like just one more thing here,
Yeah,
because I feel like we've talked about tests specifically so much. And as I said, right, certain times it's also okay to understand that this is probably going to be a drawback, but you can still go ahead with the application. Reason being, MBA application are not just a test, it's a holistic application,
yeah,
with tests being one part of it, right? So whatever we are talking about is just trying to increase the possibility of getting an admit. What it means is
exactly,
that with an average score, it's not that you don't have any possibility of getting an admit,
exactly.
right? It's maybe slightly lower, but you can still get an admit.
Yeah,
So I think this is something a lot of people also miss out. So this is why I also want to bring it out that yes, we're talking about test. We are talking about more of an ideal situation rather than, what are more realistic possible options for different
right.
people, different
Because
profiles.
the possibilities are endless, right? So
Yeah,
we had another candidate who reached out to us in round, I think for INSEAD round two, and she had received an interview invite and she had come for interview help. And she mentioned that she worked on the application on her own, everything on her own. Why? And that was purely because she did not expect an interview invite to come. And that was because she had a 615 GMAT.
wow.
So she had applied to INSEAD purely because she wanted to apply to INSEAD. She had
Yeah,
herself with test prep. She knew that she could not do it anymore. And so she applied because she just wanted to do that and test the waters. Once she received the interview call, that's when she said, okay, I'm right. Sorry, can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you now. I think we were losing you in between.
Yeah, I think there was a network issue. So I was
Yeah,
saying she applied to INSEAD purely because she wanted to test the waters and she didn't want to regret not applying.
yeah,
So she did that on her own. And once she received the interview invite, then she said, okay, I need help for the interview. I was not expecting this. So that's when she
yeah.
reached out to us and prepared for the interview. And a few days ago, I think 4 or 5 days ago, she reached out saying that she had an admit from INSEAD, right? So
Amazing.
this worked out. This is equally uh, sort of possible, but also this is not, you know, if somebody asks us, is 650 a good GMAT score to apply to INSEAD with, right?
Probably
That
no,
is, we
right?
would not say that, right? It would not be a suggestion, but at the
No.
same time, I think it all comes down to a lot of conviction in your own story
Yeah.
and what you want to do, right? So I think that is something that candidates also have to be very aware of. Uh, Very quick question. So we have somebody asking. Uh, I mentioned that February is a good time for candidates to build upon their profiles for later rounds this year. Isn't it too late already, and shouldn't the profile have been built over, a few years of good job performance? So let me very quickly clarify. You're absolutely correct. Uh, the profile is not built in 4 months. The profile that any candidate brings, it is the sum of all the experiences that you've already had, right? So there is no massive impact or life-changing things that you're going to do over the next 6 months. But right now is a very good time to focus to first figure out if there are any particular shortcomings that you might have as a candidate which are fixable in the short term, right? So over the next 3, 4 months, are there any, you know, oversights that you might have, right? Which, if you fix, will help you strengthen your story, will help you sort of build a better application. These are the things that you can do over the next 6 months, which will help you build a better application. And that's it. If it turns out that, okay, somebody does not have a lot of material to talk about, or a lot of clarity about what they want, why do they want it, then obviously might require a much longer time period, right? So February is a good time if you're already in that race, if you are already starting to think about the application process, but it's not a universal statement that it's a good time for everyone, right? So just to clarify that. We also have another question on, I've heard that not all schools consider GRE scores. As far as we are aware, uh, almost all of the top global
Yeah.
schools consider GRE scores. There are a few Indian schools which do not. Uh, I think IIMs do not consider GRE scores, but we do not focus a lot on IIMs, or you
Yeah.
know within India we only do ISB, so I'm not much aware of their requirements. But as far as global schools are concerned, almost all of them accept GRE. Uh, and All right, so let's come back to some of the previous questions that we have received.
Yeah.
Right, so how should I plan my application timeline and round strategy, uh, including everything? So sequencing tests,
Hmm.
essays, getting recommendations, and doing the school research. So if somebody is starting today in February,
Yeah.
uh, how should they plan out everything, to get done
Yeah.
with everything properly?
Absolutely. And just a bit of a segue, but to be honest, this is the profile building as you were talking about, that now February is a good time to start in order to build profiles. So this is the kind of refinement and bringing out what you have already built over the years, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think now is the good time to start. The first thing you should do is, of course, GMAT or GRE, whichever test that you have preference, because the scores are valid for 5 years. And then it doesn't really matter when you apply, even if you have taken GMAT, let's say last year or 2 years ago. The scores are perfectly valid even now. So that will take off a lot of pressure already in terms of preparation. So that would be my first recommendation. Once you have done that, once you have, let's say, you feel that you have a competitive score with you, that's when I think the second part comes in. And this is again, I'm probably going to repeat what you said before. Try to understand what are the things that you lack, right? So understand your own profile a little bit better. What are your own profile strengths? What are your own profile's weakness? What is fixable in the short term? What you need to do? Be it, for example, retaking the GMAT, right? So like these are the some things that I believe should be the other thing that you can do in parallel. Once you have identified that, work on that, because the round one deadlines are going to come somewhere around September-ish. So you still have a little bit of time, maybe 3 months, 4 months, that you can probably work around that. After you have done that is when you should start already towards application. I would say it doesn't make sense to wait until like June, July to start your application because it already gets much closer to the deadline. And I think you would need some time already to further refine, put your thoughts to the paper. If you're applying to multiple schools, how the school's essays have evolved over the time. I believe it also takes significant effort and rework and iterations to be able to bring it to the level which it's needed for all the competitive schools. And then, yes, recommendation as well has to come in parallel, right? So, like, what I would do is break your time into like 2 or 3 chunks, dedicate each chunk into certain things. One would be, let's say, test and figuring out what I need to do. Second would be doing what you have figured out in terms of need to do. And third would be the actual applying to in the school's websites and whatnots.
A very quick question here, right? So if let's say somebody is starting from scratch today, uh, would it not make sense to try and figure out what they want to do even before beginning with the test, or do you absolutely require the test score to figure out that?
No, not at all. I think those are two completely independent things,
Okay.
right? Because I would say that you first need to figure out what you need to do. Yes, test being one of them, but it's
Yeah.
only one of them, right?
Right.
There
Right.
could be even more things that you need to do probably in the meantime, which is why I would say, like, the way I put it is that you figure out your profile strengths and weaknesses because then that will give you an understanding of what needs to be done. And then, in case you're starting from scratch, we know that test is a real requirement for all schools. So, that is something you would
Yeah.
absolutely need to have. There is no doubts there, which is why you can also simultaneously start preparing for it.
Right. Right. So
I
essentially,
think, yeah,
what I think to kind of summarize it, what you're saying is figure out what steps you need to take to improve your candidature, right? Test prep is one of those things which you anyway know, right?
yeah,
But apart from that, is there anything else that you can improve in your candidature?
yeah.
Start working towards those. What would be a good time by when people should be, if let's say if somebody wants to apply to 4 to 5 schools or 6 schools in round one,
Yeah,
what would you say is a good time for them to have the scores? So
a good time. I would say somewhere around April to May. Like the earlier the better, of course. But if they have something
very
by
sorry,
April,
I mean, I'm very sorry. I think I was having again some network issues. So you said April to May?
yeah, I said like the earlier the better, right? So a good time would be somewhere around April to May. If you have something by April, it gives you a good leeway to work on your application starting May itself. Of course, if it can get done with earlier, you will have even more time. But if I have to put a deadline, like not like a hard fast deadline, but at least still like a mental block for yourself, that should be like you should have a score in May already, so that you have at least 3 months of time to be able to apply to 5 different schools.
Right. I think that makes a lot of sense. Let me come back to the next question, which was asked almost by 40 people again. Uh, what are the biggest levers to strengthen my profile in the next 3 to 6 months? So essentially, kind of a follow-up to what we've been discussing.
Yeah,
What kind of things can you do, or how can you actually strengthen your candidature over this, or let's say, a period of 3 to 6 months, uh,
yeah,
combined with what matters most to top schools?
yeah. I think the second half that you said, combined with what matters more to top schools, is exactly how I would define what can be done in the next 3 to 6 months to improve the school, to improve the candidature, right? Because
Okay.
I'm probably going to sound repetitive, but these schools are holistic admission channels. Like so,
Okay.
you
So
really
let
need
me
to,
let me sort of drive this a bit more, right?
yeah,
When you say holistic, what exactly does
perfect,
everybody says holistic, right?
yeah.
So what does holistic mean here?
So holistic would mean that let me break it down into like 4 or 5 main categories, right? So one is your academics. Second would be your career experience, career so far. Third would be your career goals or the reason of doing MBA. Fourth would be any kind of extracurricular activities or your own self-awareness that you bring to the table. Mainly these four. And then the last would be any miscellaneous, sometimes some other demographic things that you can bring to the table, right? So I think these are the main Of course, there could be some minor things, but I would say like these are the main things that a B school would look into your profile. So far that we have been talking about a test score, it's one part of academics, right? Academics would
Mm.
also have your undergrad or any other masters that you have done,
Yeah.
then your entire work experience, whatever 3 to 5 to 10 years of experience you bring to the table, a whole summary of that, then your reasons of doing an MBA, and in your life, and by life, I really mean in your life, from when you were probably like 3 years old and started doing something until today, what extracurricular activities, other activities you have done, what you have learned, what kind of exposures you have had, right? So they
So,
really
so
take all of those
just
things
to
into
sort of
account.
interrupt you there, it's not about doing NGO work.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's not
So
about doing
could you could you
NGO
could you
work.
could you elaborate a bit why do you say that?
I think this is probably another myth of the MBA, is what I've realized talking to a lot of people, that somehow NGO work is this, short way to showcase your extracurriculars that gets you into the MBA school. It's not. I had zero NGO work before I went into the school. I can talk about at least 30 to 50% of my classmates, could be even 70% of my classmates who have no NGO work. So that's still a majority population. The reason why I say that is what B School want out of you is not charity. What B School want out of you is what's your passion? Do you know who you are? What kind of things really interest you? And if there are some things that interest you, what have you done about it? Right? So like they
Okay,
really want to see people in action a lot more than having only one type of action.
okay. So, uh, could you give an example of, let's say, if somebody does not have a lot of extracurricular activities or
Yeah,
not a lot of NGO work, right?
yeah,
What could they talk about uh, to
yeah,
showcase their extracurriculars or their engagement outside of work?
absolutely. So I can actually take an example of someone whom I was supporting there. Um, they have zero extracurricular work, right? Yeah, sorry, zero NGO work. I shouldn't say extracurricular, zero NGO work. So when we started discussing, this was probably one of the biggest questions, that how do I show my extracurriculars? But once we started discussing, we also found that person had been part of Toastmasters Club for almost 10 years, joined in undergrad itself, worked through the 4 years as Toastmaster. Once they started working, they continued in their local chapter. Through that, they gained certain positions. They did a lot of different competitions, elocutions, and whatnot. And that really shows they have certificates and everything to prove for it. So for me, this is a strong extracurricular already, because one, it shows the level of engagement and achievement that the person has. Second, it is consistent over the last 10 years. For me, that matters a lot more than any random NGO experience, right? So consistency
Mhm.
and the level of engagement is some way I would evaluate an extracurricular.
Understood. I think let's take up a question from here. I think I saw a question. How to portray leadership through your applications if you haven't had a title? I think that's a good question. Yes.
I think that's a
Thank
good
you for
question.
asking.
Yes.
Thank you for asking that. Yeah.
Another common question that I think, Piyush, both you and I get in this
Yeah.
particular case, right?
And it's
Uh,
very obvious, right? Most of these
yeah,
candidates, they're applying with 3 to 4 years of experience by the time
yeah.
they're applying. A
It's
ton
not
of them, like
sufficient.
a majority of them would have never led teams or would have never
Yeah,
managed people, right? So
yeah,
uh, I think that's a very common sort of question to have. And candidates essentially incorrectly assume that they don't have any leadership to showcase.
exactly.
I've had, I think once we have started working with candidates, the same people who are saying I have no leadership experiences, they ended up talking about so many leadership instances in their life, in their professional
Yeah,
life, that they were surprised. Okay,
yeah,
this is how we can portray it. But
absolutely.
would you want to share like what exactly does leadership experiences mean? What leadership
True.
values mean here, and what B schools are looking for?
I think the gap that you're describing, Piyush, here is that whenever someone talks about leadership, a very clear image that pops up into the head is leading a team of people, right? And I think this is where the entire story gets stuck because if people have not led teams, they don't have leadership. Doesn't work like that. There is people leadership. Yes, absolutely, it's true. But there is also your own project leadership. For me, maybe this is a bit oversimplification. So, yeah, feel free to add your own points there. But I would say any position, any situation where you are the one who's driving, taking the initiative, and you are taking the decisions, or at least influencing the decisions within your own group of people, within your own peers, already shows to a large extent a leadership. Because what is expected out of leadership is to be able to make certain decisions, persuade people, so that everyone works towards an outcome which will help everyone around them, right? Now, this can be shown in your extracurriculars as well. This can be shown even in your professional experience. My own example, right? Or generally, consulting, how it works is that you're always an individual contributor or you're working in a team of maybe like three consultants. It's very rare that consultants are leading large teams of people. Having said that, one of the things we always find is that consulting still remains one of a key collaborator with MBA, both going in and both coming out of MBA, right? So if only leading people was the case to be able to prove leadership, I believe consulting would have never cracked an MBA ever, right? So I think that is proof itself for what I'm trying to say here. But yes, I think leadership has multiple facets to it. It can be you were doing something during your undergrad that gave you some certain initial exposure, something in your extracurricular that you continued over the time, and then something in your own job in your professional career.
Right. I think that's something that's very nicely explained. One thing that I often tell candidates is what B schools are looking for are not leadership uh, experiences or leadership roles. What they're looking for instead is the leadership perspectives that you bring to the table. And what leadership perspectives mean essentially is what you think and practice good leadership. What are the good qualities that you practice and you
Yeah,
think are good leadership qualities, right? So, for instance, you could be a junior team member. You're sitting in a meeting, you see the presentation, and you have a particular point of view which nobody else has shared, and you think it's a very important point. Are you somebody who will stand up in that meeting and say, okay, this is what I think about it? Maybe you are proven wrong. Maybe you figure out that, okay, they've already thought about it and it doesn't work like that. But still, are you somebody who shares your opinion? Maybe you cannot do anything about it, but are you somebody who stands up and voices an opinion? Are you someone who enables others to do that? Are you somebody who sees a colleague in distress and goes ahead and sort of tries to calm them down or help them out, right? You don't need to be a leader
yeah,
or in a position to showcase leadership qualities that you bring to the table. And what almost all top B schools are looking for are those leadership qualities rather than
yeah,
leadership roles, right? I think 90% of our candidates, when they're filling out their application forms in the section of how many people do you lead, they end up putting zero,
zero. Yeah.
right?
Do you have any
And
leadership experience? No.
yeah, exactly. So they end up putting zero because they've not formally
Yeah,
led teams. They don't have people reporting into them, which is very
yeah,
obvious as well because these are candidates with 3 to 4 years of experience when this is very rare, right?
yeah,
Obviously, there would be some people who have that, uh, but that's fine. Almost 95% of our candidates end up getting into all of these top B schools that they were
yeah,
very apprehensive of getting into,
yeah,
right? So this tells you essentially that leadership, B schools are much more flexible about
yeah,
understanding your leadership perspectives than candidates assume them to be, right?
yeah.
Uh, let's very quickly sort of go to another question. Uh, how do I craft an authentic application story that ties my past, my why MBA, and my post MBA goals into a coherent narrative across essays?
That's a good question. Um, if you know what's your past, what's your goals, how it's gonna fit, I don't think tying becomes a big challenge, right? I think at least I don't know what has your experience been, Piyush. In my experience, the bigger challenge is always to be able to understand your own experiences, your own past, your own motivations of future, and your own motivations on how MBA can help you. I think once we have that, the story is rather more simple because I have done A through which I know I want to do B, and to be able to move from point A to B, MBA gives me the best way to achieve that transition. So the story remains rather more simple on the paper. But what would you say?
I think I largely agree here. I think the biggest problem is not sort of figuring out this, tying up the story, right? It's more to do, and that's essentially what we do during our work with candidates, right? Is first figuring out those instances which
Yeah,
define all of these, right? So if I ask you, or if I ask a candidate in general, like, okay, what experiences have defined you? Figuring out those instances, reflecting on them, and then trying to identify, okay, are these actually the experiences that have defined me, or is it just because it sounds nice that I want to try to sort of bring them up? I think that is the major work.
yeah.
Once you have those experiences lined up, connecting them through a story is much easier, much simpler. But
I
the
say
work is in
I would
figuring
agree,
it
yeah.
out.
Because I think even the candidates that I think I have worked with and we have worked with, because what we do, Piyush, is that we spend like initial 8 hours just entirely
We
focused
s-
on this,
we
right?
spend
Like,
a crazy amount of
you
time
know,
doing that. Yeah.
yeah, and 8 hours is something on paper, but the actual time that goes beyond is like probably like 25 to 30 hours per candidate, because this is the biggest challenge. Like to be
Yep.
able to find what's the correct instance, what is it that you have demonstrated, to be able to really understand those small nuances, because once we have that, tying together is a simple task. I think tying together why people get stuck into building a coherent narrative is probably because of maybe there is some sort of gap in the understanding of themselves or of MBA or somewhere along the chain, which is why once probably they start writing the essay, they feel like, okay, what do I put over there? But I think what we do is exactly opposite. So we first figure out everything, probably a lot more than what is actually required to write one essay. And then we start writing the essay. So for us, essay writing takes almost like it's super straightforward. Like,
Yeah. 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 I think so. Again, different people have different
yeah,
approaches. Different consultants will have different ones. Uh, we really like to sort of dive into those experiences first and then sort of figure out our way. I think that works. There's a comment from Harshit saying it's already February, and if somebody has not started with GMAT, they need to start today, give the exam by June, uh, start the applications by June, and then apply in September, and then have the interviews and everything. It's overwhelming. Uh, I would slightly disagree. The amount of work that you have mentioned is less. There is more work involved, right? So you will have to,
yeah,
let me just break it down further, right? So if somebody has not started yet and you want to sort of apply this year, you need to get done with your GMAT GRE. You need to get your test scores. Obviously, you need to get started working on your applications. You need to figure out the school. So you need to do a lot of B school research. You need to talk to a lot of people to figure out if the schools are fit for you. Then once the applications are announced somewhere in end of May and early of beginning of June, you will need to start working on the applications. Uh, on average, schools will have 4 to 5 essays to write. So you write all those, work with your referees to get your LORs done, build your resume, uh, and then hope everything
I
comes
think.
together and you are able to apply to 5 schools by August or September. Once that is done, receive the interview invites, work on those interview, work on the interview preparation, give all the interviews in October. For 1 month, absolutely die in agony and anxiety from waiting for your results. And then in December, get your results and hopefully be happy. Uh, it's a very, very anxiety laden journey. It's a very difficult journey, and it's a massive journey, right? The entire MBA application process, it's a huge process, a huge undertaking. And the worst part is not the expanse of it. The worst part is that you cannot tell anyone. You are in this journey absolutely alone as a candidate, right? So it gets very overwhelming. This is a very a big unspoken part about MBA applications. It's a very uh, isolating journey because you cannot talk to anyone about this. You go tell your parents, they won't understand a word of what you're saying. Why are you so stressed about writing some essays, right? You can't tell your colleagues because batana nahi hai. You can't tell people in your office. It will affect your career. Your manager is going to come back to you and say, okay, you write your LORs and give it to me so I can send it, right? And you have to convince them to write the LORs actually. Uh, you can't tell your friends because they are partying and you are sort of not going to their parties and they won't be able to understand why you are doing that. So it's a very isolating journey. Uh, but in all of this, if you are able to find a community, if you are able to find people to support you, and if you are able to sort of build a structured process, which tells you very clearly, okay, this is what you need to do, this is the first step, second step, third step, all of this will feel very manageable, right? So absolutely, it's very overwhelming, but do keep in mind you're also planning to apply to the top MBA programs. Things are not going to get easier for you, right? If you do end up getting into those top MBA programs, life is going to remain overwhelming for you for the next 20, 30, 40 years that you're planning for, right?
Like my experience, it
So,
gets actually more overwhelming once you are in the MBA. Then
yeah,
I feel like, yeah,
exactly. Half of our candidates who have received admits in round one, they keep messaging me saying, okay, the admin work that is now involved with visa processing and everything, that is more anxiety
yeah,
inducing than the entire application process. And this is not going to change, right? Because you're opting for going into some of the best business schools on the planet. The best business schools में जाके life आसान थोड़ी होगा भाई, right?
yeah,
Okay, I think
yeah,
we're already
I
50
think you've
minutes
driven
in.
the point. Yeah.
Yeah, let's take one more question before we sort of close.
Yeah.
But I think I'm not sure if people will find it inspiring or they will run away from the
Yeah.
MBA process yet. I hope you find it inspiring rather than running away from it. It's just how life is, yeah.
Like how I would say is that what you've said is absolutely the truth. So people who want to do it at least know what they are committing to. So be brave. Be brave if this is something you really want to do. At certain point in time, you have to take certain risk. You have to go through some really challenging times, and only then something good will come out, right? So I would say just be brave.
No, that's absolutely very correct. Uh, that's I think that's the first step, right? It comes
Yeah,
in automatically. If you're applying for top MBA programs, I think you're already brave because
yeah.
it's not something that everybody will take initiative on, right? So, okay, let's come back to one more question. Um, we had a question, I think, we had, I think, a lot of people, 20 people asking, how do I validate post-MBA career outcomes? I think we have discussed that.
I think
Talk
so.
to
Yeah.
people, check out the talk to B schools, attend webinars, reach out to people who are currently there, understand from them if it's actually working out or not. So I think this is something that we have covered a bit. Uh, okay, we have a question around financing, right? How should I think about financing scholarships, ROI when choosing schools? Uh, and what improves scholarship odds? Okay, so I'll take this question, but I'll keep it very short. As far as the financing ROI, okay, I'll break it down. Financing and scholarships are concerned. Uh, my suggestion at this point of time, when you're planning to apply, is do not think about it, right? You know that you are planning for an MBA, it's going to be very expensive. Obviously, start saving as much as you can, but do not think about financing or scholarships. And I think the biggest mistake that I've seen candidates make is making this a part of their school selection process. That, okay, I'm going to apply to these schools because I can afford these schools, or I'm not going to apply to these schools because I cannot afford these schools, right? I am somebody who says, don't think of it that way. Do not make financing decisions a part of your school selection, because at this point of time, you don't know what you're going to finance and how much, right? If you end up getting into, so we had a candidate who got into Darden, right? And she got in with 100% scholarship. So her financing requirements are gone for Darden, right? Whereas a different candidate who gets in with zero scholarship will have a very different financing requirement, right? So the financing part, if you just choose it basis, okay, will you be able to pay this right now? It does not make sense. Wait for the decision, then you can always take a call if it's something that's affordable for you or not affordable. Regarding scholarships, I don't think any of you are going to believe me, but the truth is, there is absolutely nothing that you can do specifically to improve your odds of scholarship. All you can do is to improve your application, and your applications are going to get you scholarships. But that is a very natural self-driving process. There is zero ac- specific things that you can do which will affect your scholarship outcomes. Admission outcomes are extremely opaque, right? They're very speculative. You don't know what is going to happen. Scholarship decisions are 5 times more opaque than that, right? You don't know what is going to happen.
Yeah.
So this is what I suggest. Aniket, if you have any suggestions based on what you've experienced, what you've seen at HEC and with your candidates.
I still question why I didn't get a scholarship. So I don't think I have any answer to that, right? So, so I think I
Right.
100% agree with you. Um,
I have had
just
candidates who got into Wharton with a 60,000 scholarship. So they have an admit from Wharton with a 60,000 scholarship, and they also get an admit from Kellogg. Kellogg gives them zero,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Last year we had a candidate with CBS $100,000, Chicago Booth with $100,000, and they also got into LBS. LBS said zero,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
there is you can't make sense of scholarship decisions, right?
yeah.
So do not worry about that.
And in fact, half of the scholarship is based on your application merit, so they don't even need anything additional from you. Other half do need something additional, but then it's really, really company driven, so you can't really do anything about it. So
Yeah,
it makes zero sense to think and work for scholarships particularly. Just know that MBA is expensive. If you're able to manage, let's say if you think that it's an okay risk for you to take, then forget about it. Because as you said, Piyush, financing only comes into the picture if you have an admit. If you don't have an admit, everything goes down the drain. So
yeah,
that's the
absolutely.
priority.
Absolutely. I think let's close with one question, which is for admission consultants. So when does it make sense to use an admission consultant? What should I expect and how do I evaluate fit and quality? And again, if you have any other questions about admission consultants, please feel free to sort of put them in the chat. I think let's cover that very quickly. So Aniket, you work
Yeah.
with a consultant. Me, uh, why did you choose to work with a consultant? Let's hear your thoughts. And
Yeah.
now, what do you think? Why should
Yeah.
people use a consultant? Should they work with consultants or should they not? And in what cases would it make sense not to?
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, I work with you, Piyush, because something that you said really stood out for me, the isolating part of the journey. And this was not something I was very comfortable with. So for me, through an admission consultant, there are multiple benefits, right? So biggest one is that I never felt that I'm alone in this. And that really helped me prepare for this overwhelming journey in total. So I think that was one more mental support, I would say, beyond any other objective thing that you can think about, right? So it's like, I don't know, it's like getting a mentorship, getting a free therapy session along with the admission consulting in a way, right? So I think that's one thing that really stands out for me. Other than that, I believe I really want an external person who knows this geography or who knows this whole industry to take a look at what I'm putting out there. Because I remember the
So kind
initial
of
draft of
validation, I think you
validation.
mean.
The
Yep.
initial draft that I had, I remember in one draft with 250 word limit, I put 100 words for a quote. Now I think about it and I laugh at myself that how stupid I was to be able to think. But at that point in time, in my head, it made perfect sense. Ah, it's such an amazing quote. Let me put it. But that validation was the thing that really helped me understand whether it actually makes sense or not. So I think that is also where I would say it really makes sense to have a consultant because you can't really talk to other people. Your friends are not going to see the story the way you want them to see. They're going to see it from their own biases. So to get that really unbiased perspective is when I think it makes sense to have the admission consultant.
Let me sort of flip the question. In what situations would it not make sense to have a consultant, or would you say, okay, you can absolutely go ahead without a consultant, you don't need one?
If you have a very clear understanding about your profile, your strengths and weaknesses, the instances, the examples, how you're going to put out there, and how everything will be connected coherently to be able to present to an admission committee, you absolutely don't need consultant because these are the things, these are the only things the consultant can help you, right? They're not going to create experiences for you.
At least we will not.
We will
I
not.
think I think there are a few who do that.
Yeah, we're not going
We
to write
wouldn't.
your essay for you. We're not going to create your experiences for you. That is something you have to have by yourself.
Right. I think one more thing I think that a few of my candidates have mentioned before is because I think we talked about that structuredness of the process, right? Because there are so many things, so many moving parts at all times within the process. You're applying to 5, 6, 7 schools sometimes. Uh, and I think having that accountability with somebody, right, that could
Yeah,
really help. So a lot of candidates often say this that you know one of the best things that they liked was that okay, somebody was holding them accountable for doing things,
yeah,
and it kind of gave them that structure to sort of finish everything on time without having a lot of stress. I think most of our candidates anyway, they finish everything at least 2 weeks before the deadlines.
yeah,
So when the deadlines are there and everybody is going crazy on LinkedIn, okay, I've done this and I'm not sleeping. Our candidates are sleeping very well usually.
yeah.
But that's purely because of the structure and the timeliness that we build into the process, right? So I think uh, there is no sort of there's nothing like that you have to work with a consultant, right? Uh, I think I shared an example of a candidate 650 INSEAD who also did not work with a consultant, right? Uh, but what you need to be very clear on is what you want to present. Second, you're absolutely sure of your goals and you can present your story very well. You have that coherency nailed. Third, you're able to manage yourself and the entire structuring of all the things that are required from the application, right? I think if you have these three things, uh, I don't think you require a consultant. But if you need any of these, right, then don't hesitate in reaching out to consultants because at the end of the day, if you want to go to a top B school, you need to have everything that you can do in the best possible way, right? It's like YOMO. So you only do MBA once. So, you know, if you don't optimize your efforts, you might not have the optimal results. So do not leave any stone unturned. Consultants are not necessary, right? We are definitely a luxury,
Yeah.
but very functional luxury. And we do end up helping a lot. Uh, but yes, you can definitely go ahead, apply to top B schools without consultants. I think that brings us to the end of the session. It was a lovely sort of discussion. Thank you, Aniket, so much. for being there.
Thank you as
It
well.
was great interacting with you. I hope you'll enjoy the conversation, uh, and a lot of questions were answered. I know we were not able to cover a lot of other questions, but I think these questions demand a lot of detail, which essentially led us to almost 1 hour, 5 minutes now. So thank you so much again for joining. This video and anyway will be on YouTube, so you can always refer back to it. If you have questions, if you have doubts, uh, or if you would want to figure out what can you specifically do to improve your candidature, very specifically get action steps for yourself, absolutely feel free to reach out to us at Management Masters. Uh, there is only one goal that we essentially work with, and that is to get you into the best possible school that you can, right? And it was great. Have a great 11 months left. I think the first month has already been very, very interesting. We have 11 more months of Trump Baba. So
Let's
good
see.
luck, everyone. Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you.